no, wait,
Yeah.
are these 1, 2, 3, or was this 1, 2, 3? You know,
Yeah,
so
yeah,
I was like,
yeah.
it's Robert.
Yeah, all right. And Robert doesn't know, so no change there. Stump the chump. The chumps.
Where was she at? What book was she in?
Yeah. Tribes. What tribes? The Apache? You got any Indian blood in you? Does anybody here have Indian blood? Do you know what?
What?
Indian blood? Native Indian?
To go back, wasn't it?
I do.
You do.
Yeah. Cherokee.
You moved to Oklahoma, you get everything free.
Yeah. Well, you know, I found out later, we can't determine whether my great-grandmother was full-blooded or half. And so, and we can't document, so I never wouldn't have gotten any help, I would guess, but yeah, I'm supposedly, I'm either a 16th or a 32nd. Yeah. And we always said Indians have no hair. So another evidence that none on my arms or legs or anything.
So it must be India.
Yeah. So you must have some.
We're going to Tahlequah tomorrow to get our Indian.
Yeah, there you go. My father always said that my dad was totally bald, and my dad would always say, "Well, son, grass doesn't grow on a busy street." So, of course, I would say nor concrete, but he wasn't real fond of that. John, I struck out on, I can't,
Find anybody at this point? Yeah. Okay.
I think it's going to be it's almost, God's going to almost have to send it in a package.
Yeah.
But I haven't stopped, but
Well, they still haven't announced it yet, so there's still,
still some time.
yeah. You know, I'd love to see somebody who was gifted in music and preaching.
Yes. And that's what I thought.
Church needs. Yeah.
Wonder if Mickey Rapier wants a part-time job.
Right. They could move out by the lake and
Yeah,
have a little.
yeah. Somehow I kind of think he'll say no. But you need that's the kind of person you need
Yeah.
that could do both. And that's what I thought too. Some of the people I thought of initially could do the preaching and some of the pastoral work, but you really need, a jack of all
At this point,
trades.
They're just looking for the pastoral type of
Yeah.
work, but,
I think like you do. I mean,
yeah.
They really, that would enhance the. Well, good morning, everyone. Good to have you here. Thank you. You honor me. This is one of the more difficult Panorama Pluses to write and to study and to keep it all in your brain, because it's just a lot of repetition of stuff. But that's by biblical design, because we are in biblical narrative or history. And biblical narrative is not just history, it's theological history. And we're not hearing about everything these kings did. We're only hearing about it from a theological lens. How did this king perform his duties in the theomonarchy approach? In other words, God leading the monarch who would lead the people. as opposed to just a king randomly doing whatever he thinks is best. So I think for session 2, we're now looking at the kings of Israel in the north. And I would think in session 2, Proverbs 14:34, you might write that at the top somewhere. Proverbs 14:34 is going to be our theme. Righteousness exalts a nation, but sin is a disgrace to any people. Did you hear that? Righteousness exalts a nation, but sin is a disgrace to any people. I think that's a good verse for all 19 kings, as we will see. The Amplified Bible amplifies righteousness by this, and I think it really helps bring it out a little bit. The Amplified Bible says, righteousness, moral and spiritual integrity, and virtuous character, which we are not going to see much of in the 19 kings of the north. Or the New Living Translation makes it a great principle for even today. Godliness makes a nation great, but sin is a disgrace to any people. Godliness makes a nation great. Now, I'm not politicizing right now in the least, but in light of the slogan MAGA that Trump has, "Make America Great Again," godliness makes a nation great, not a political agenda. And that's the thrust behind these 19 kings and their failure in the Northern Empire. Well, the diagram of the timeline, we're dealing with Israel in the north, and you'll notice that Israel, as a northern kingdom, with their 19 kings, will last until 722 BC, when the Assyrians will finally defeat them, destroy their capital, take away their people, their goods, and their wealth, and what have you, and then later transport other people back in to replace the captives. So that's where we're headed. Last time we talked about some of the reasons why it's split a little bit. I'll let you read the bottom of page 23 at your leisure, but let's go to the next page. And I'm not going to hit every point along the way, but but during the time of the kings, there are major powers on the prowl in the ancient Near East. And we need to be aware, a little bit aware of some of these powers. So on page 24, the first one that I have for you is Assyria. Point B, by nature, Assyria was expansionist. I mean, they were trying to expand their empire. They're quite aggressive. And they made inroads even into the land of Palestine. I can't recall. I didn't do a big map, did I, of the world. At the back of your Bibles, you may have maps of the world in that day. You may want to flip back to see the Assyrian, later the Babylonian empires, just to get a sense of where they were. Number 4, around the middle of the page, see where it says Shalmaneser the fifth? I would circle that number 4, that 4 in parentheses. He's the one that began to attack Samaria, the capital of Israel. Actually, it was the 3rd capital. They had 2 capitals before that, but this was the one at the time of the attack on Samaria, right near the end of the northern kingdom. But it was circle 5, Sargon, actually Sargon II, who captured Samaria. And I want you to notice 3 things that we've highlighted. He occupied the land. That's a duh. Of course he did. 2, he took captives. And then 3, he brought in foreigners to intermarry. And in time, and in passing of history, those foreigners intermarried with the remaining Jews, and they became known as Samaritans. So this is the origins of the later Samaritans. Why did the Jews of the New Testament time hate the Samaritans so much? They considered them half-breeds. They had disobeyed God's instruction to not intermarry with the foreigners, to remain pure in their devotion to God and purity of the Jewish race. And they intermarried, and so they just despised Samaritans. And the Samaritans returned the favor. You might remember in the life of Jesus, he'll send his disciples into a Samaritan village to get food and provisions, and they won't sell them any. And so James and John, who were known as the sons of thunder, Boanerges, the sons of thunder, well, Jesus, do you want us to rain down fire and brimstone on the village? Yeah, well, that's a great way to do it. But at any rate, that's where that comes from. Look at point D, theologically. Circle that point, because this is important. Theologically, Assyria was used as God's instrument of judgment upon Israel. It is not because Assyria is this kind and gracious nation that they then would discipline. God can use a crooked stick to hit a solid lick on a sinful nation like the northern kingdom of Israel. Assyria is God's instrument. Now note, God used Israel as his instrument of judgment on the Canaanites in the book of Joshua. And we sometimes forget that in Genesis it says that God gave the Canaanites 400 years to repent, and yet they got viler and viler. They were despicable, crude, ugly, and peoples, the Canaanites. So God would use Israel as his instrument of judgment upon the Canaanites, while at the same time he's fulfilling his promise to the Israelites that I'm going to give you land. And so God's really accomplishing two purposes in the book of Joshua. God will use Assyria and Babylon as his means or instruments of judgment. So Babylon will be used by God on Judah, the southern kingdom. Now, there's a principle in there, and that is God can use people, circumstances, and events as instruments to judge or discipline us. It's just not announced. We sometimes don't know until maybe looking in the rearview mirror of our life. We sometimes say, I think the Lord allowed that to happen to discipline me. So just keep it as a thought. Now, if it bothers you that God uses unworthy nations as instruments of judgment on God's chosen people, that's the very problem Habakkuk, the prophet, had, which we'll see when we get to the kings of Judah. But Habakkuk's going to say, God, how long am I going to pray to you about the violence in Jerusalem and the lack of social justice in Jerusalem and the moral condition of Jerusalem? Lord, how long am I going to have to pray and you not do anything? And God answers Habakkuk and says, well, funny you should say that, or it's funny you should ask. I'm now bringing in the Chaldeans, that's the Babylonians. I'm bringing in the Babylonians to be my instrument of discipline. And then Habakkuk said, well, wait a minute. How can you use a nation more vile than we are? They're worse than we are, and you're going to use them to judge us? And God's basic answer was, climb on the rampart and watch. Just wait and see. You watch and see what I do. God can use whatever he wishes to accomplish his purposes. And that's maybe a lesson coming out of that. Well, you'll notice that Isaiah 10, woe to the Assyrian, the rod of my anger, the club of my wrath. That's the whole idea, my instrument. At the bottom, Egypt. We'll just turn the page on Egypt. You might read it later if you wish. Egypt is at its lower point in its world domination, or known world domination. And so they're not really causing a big stir much during this biblical period. The Arameans, they were located in the northern part of Israel, Padan Aram. Do you remember when Jacob went to find a wife? He kind of had this little problem with Esau, his brother, stole his birthright and his blessing. So his mother sends him off up into Padan Aram, where the mother's people lived, in order to find a suitable wife. Well, that's the area. It's Aram, Padan Aram. It would be extremely north of Israel today. Let you read some of their cities: Hamath, Damascus, which today is Syria, Zobah, and others. Babylonia. I don't know why I added point A, just because I've always been fascinated by it. But we're all familiar with Hammurabi, right? The Code of Hammurabi. That was around 1700 BC. Moses wrote the Pentateuch, or the 5 books of Moses. He wrote the Pentateuch 1440, 1450 BC. Now, where was Moses educated? Egypt. He was raised in the household of Pharaoh. That was the cultural, intellectual center of the world of that time. Do you suppose that they had copies of Hammurabi's law codes and other things, which would have been material, raw data that Moses would have studied, and later, when the Holy Spirit is moving him, he writes a law code that scholars have said is somewhat similar to Hammurabi. Not in all specifics, but it's just similar. They look alike. Well, of course they do. Moses was a very bright fellow. He was more than just a sheep herder. So, point B, the Neo-Chaldean Empire. Sometimes you're going to see the word Chaldea. Sometimes you'll see Babylonian. If you can think in terms of the Persian Gulf, and flowing into the Persian Gulf is the Tigris and Euphrates River. Well, that marshy area where the Tigris-Euphrates was, as it flowed into the Persian Gulf, that was the area of Chaldea originally. Do you remember that God called Abram, later known as Abraham, called Abram out of Ur of the Chaldees? So that's where it was. And so that's kind of the region where they were, but they kind of became an influential part of the whole broader Babylonia thing, so that you could refer to them as Chaldeans or Babylonians, based on when in time you're talking about them. In fact, Habakkuk calls them Chaldeans, but it still means Babylonians. So at any rate, got some of their key people. Look at point C at the bottom of the page. Nebuchadnezzar is a important biblical figure. He will be the one who will defeat Judah, ransack the temple, and he takes captives. And in his first major deportation, he will take Daniel and his 3 buddies. The second major deportation, Ezekiel will be taken, along with some others. But when Nebuchadnezzar destroys Babylon, that will end the southern kingdom, the kingdom of Judah. All right? So let's turn the page. You can read about those others later, but I just tried to do a sketchy detail of these empires that we're going to be reading about. What we have on the next page is a listing of the 19 kings and the years that they reigned. Notice that there is a Jeroboam 1, because later there'll be a Jeroboam 2. Some of these guys have other names. If you read the biblical text, they get renamed. We're just using the one that was kind of more their regal name. So at any rate, there they are, 19 kings listed. And we're ready to go to the first one, and we'll see how far we can get. All right? When we get to the end, there's less data and much more corruption and assassinations and all kinds of stuff. And so the biblical data is less and less the further we get to the end of the Northern Empire. What I've tried to do is follow the same pattern. I try to give you the father's name and the tribe, if we know it, then the dates of his reign, and then the theological evaluation. Please understand, some of these kings may have been good politically, they may have been good administratively, and so forth, but they are bad kings by biblical theological evaluation. Bad basically meaning how faithful they were to following God's very clear instructions. And what we're going to discover is all 19 kings of the Northern Empire are bad. There's one that's bad, but not as bad as those before him. But that's still bad. So that's kind of what we're going to know. All right, let's turn the page. Top of page 27. The next thing I do for all of these kings are some key events. I'm not going to get everything. When you go back and read their fuller story, if you ever do so, you'll see a lot of information I didn't include. But I'm just trying to give you this is the Reader's Digest version. Okay? Point A, he led the rebellion and split from Judah. You might recall, because we kind of go over it a little bit, in the United Empire. But basically, when Solomon dies in 931, his son, Rehoboam, goes to the elders, and the elders say, look, well, first of all, a delegation comes from the north, northern tribes, and they say, look, your father was really heavy-handed, so lighten up, and we'll serve you as king. We'll continue this united empire. Rehoboam says, well, let me consult the elders that were the advisors to my father. And the elders said, yeah, that's right. You need to lighten up. Then he goes to his buddies, his cronies. And his cronies basically say to him, you tell them you thought it was rough under my dad. You ain't seen nothing yet. That's Hebrew. You ain't seen nothing yet. And so he ignores the advice of the wise elders, and he follows the advice of his cronies, and they tell the delegation, they came back after 3 days, they tell the delegation, and Jeroboam, leader of that northern delegation, Jeroboam, who used to be in Solomon's court, until Solomon found out he had some designs on the kingship a little bit, so Jeroboam had to run off to Egypt until Solomon died, and then he came back, and is kind of the acknowledged leader of the Northern Confederation, of the Northern Committee, if you will. Well, they just say, to your tents, Israel, Northern Kingdom, Judah's on their own. And that's the split. So now we're split north and south. Now what Jeroboam did is going to be the most heinous sin that will be characteristic of virtually every king of the Northern Empire. And it's the point B. He establishes two centers for worship. One will be in the north at a place called Dan. The other will be on the border between Israel and Judah at a place called Bethel. So look at verse 26. This is in the middle of the page. Jeroboam thought to himself, the kingdom will now likely revert to the house of David. He was always paranoid that the people would want to go to Jerusalem, where the tabernacle was located, and worship, because that was the capital of the United Empire, and that's the religious center of the empire. And Jeroboam said, if enough people go, they'll eventually reject me as king, and I want to be king. And so he says they're going to revert to the house of David. If these people go up to offer sacrifices at the temple, they'll again give their allegiance to their lord Rehoboam, son of Solomon, king of Judah. They will kill me and return to King Rehoboam. Now, that shows us the lack of faith Jeroboam had, because there had been a prophetic word given by Ahijah, a prophet, where God had said to him, I'm going to give you a kingdom. And God said, I don't give you a kingdom just to take it away from you for no reason at all. He does not trust this prophet's word from the Lord. And he's just paranoid. He says, they're going to kill me. And after seeking advice, the king made 2 golden calves. Now, does that rub you wrong? Yeah, you go back to the 10 Commandments. You don't do that. Go back to Exodus 32, when Aaron was duped by the people in creating the golden calf, while Moses is up getting the 10 Commandments, and he comes down and sees the orgy that's going on, and the anger of God, and Moses gets so mad he breaks the tablets and so forth. So he makes 2 golden calves, and he says to the people, it's much too difficult for you to go up to Jerusalem. Here's your gods. These represent your gods. We'll put 1 golden calf at Dan. We'll put the other golden calf right down here in the southern border at Bethel.
Where do you think he went to seek that advice?
Well, I'm sorry?
Where do you think he went to seek that advice?
Probably he has advisors. counselors. And, he's now king, so you've got to have kingly advisors and all.
So the elders.
Of the northern tribes. Yeah, these wouldn't be the elders
That's right.
of Judah, no, different group. Now, verse 30, and this thing, I would underline it, double underline it, became sin. This is a big sin. Okay, let's turn the page. He also spurned the prophetic word sent to him. One of the things we've noted is that in a theomonarchy, when the theomonarch, when the king does not rule the way God wants him to, what does he do? He sends prophets with a prophetic word for the king. The king is supposed to repent and then get back on the right road. Well, he spurns the prophetic word sent to him. 1 Kings 13, even after this, Jeroboam did not change his evil ways. He is the prototype of an evil king. Not only that, if you're going to have golden calves at Dan and at Bethel, you got to have a priesthood. Who is the tribe for priest? Tribe of Levi. No Levite is going to go up and serve in Dan or in Bethel. So he says, I'll create my own priesthood. Raise your hand if you want to be a priest in our new worship. That's almost the way that it turns out. And so he consecrated. So anyone who wanted to be a priest could do so. Verse 34, this was the sin of the house, the dynasty of Jeroboam that led to its downfall and its destruction from the face of the earth. He rejects the prophetic word sent to him, and he pays a price for it. Let's go to D. He also received the Lord's rebuke upon some of his actions as king. You have done more evil than all who lived before you. Boy, there's something for your tombstone. You've done more evil than all before you. You have made notice three things. You've made other gods. You aroused my anger, and you turned your back on me. This is the sin of idolatry. Later, Hosea will say this is like spiritual adultery. Idolatry is spiritual adultery. That God says, Israel, you're my wife, and you have, in King James language, you have gone a-whoring after other gods. And it is repugnant in the eyes of God. Well, summarize his kingdom. He reigned 22 years, and then Nadab, his son, succeeded him. Well, let's see if things get better. Notice point 2, he had a short reign. Theological evaluation, bad. Turn the page. Key events. By the way, Nadab means generous or noble, and he was neither. A, he continued the evil pattern of his father. And please note this, because this refrain is going to be repeated many, many times of the northern kings. 1 Kings 15, Nadab, son of Jeroboam, became king. Verse 26, he did evil. There's his theological evaluation. Following the ways of his father and committing the same sin his father had caused Israel to commit. So if Jeroboam was the worst king that ever lived and his son's doing just like his, like father, like son, what would you say about Nadab? Pretty bad. Well, he gets assassinated, point B, while they're at war with the Philistines. And point C, this fulfilled the prophecy of the prophet of Judah that Jeroboam's dynasty would end. So it was a short dynasty. Jeroboam dies, his son succeeds him, has a very short reign, he's assassinated, and the guy that assassinates him is basically the next king. Look at point C, Baasha. He is of the tribe of Issachar. His theological evaluation is bad. The key events in his life, he became king by assassinating Nadab. B, he received a prophetic word from a prophet by the name of Jehu. And Jehu prophesied that he would have a short dynasty. And you notice where I have 1 Kings 16? Don't turn there, but let me read some of 1 Kings 16. Then the word of the Lord came to Jehu, the prophet, against Baasha. Now this is what he said. I lifted you up from the dust and made you leader of my people Israel, but you walked in the ways of Jeroboam. So here's that familiar refrain. Everything's going back to Jeroboam and how lousy he was. And he was lousy. But you walked in the ways of Jeroboam, caused my people to sin, provoked me to anger by their sins, so I'm about to consume Baasha and his house, or his dynasty. And I will make your house like that of Jeroboam, son of Nebat. Dogs will eat those belonging to Baasha who die in the city, and the birds of the air will feed on those who die in the country. Well, that's a cheery message. We thank the prophet Jehu for that. Turn the page. We have a summarization of that at the top. We're going to go ahead and move to Elah. Maybe things will get better. This is going to be the son of Baasha. He's also of the tribe of Issachar, of course. Now, notice, he had a short reign as well. Theological evaluation, same as others, bad. Key events. Ended at his death the dynasty of his father Baasha by the prophecy of Jehu. He was assassinated by one of his military leaders. Boy, things are just running smoothly, wouldn't you think, in the northern kingdom? 1 Kings 16, Zimri, one of his officials, apparently a once trusted official, who had command of half his chariots, must have been I don't know, I'd say maybe, Randy, wouldn't that be a 4-star general maybe? You got half of it, 3-star?
At least.
Plotted against him. Elah was in Tirzah. Now, Tirzah was the capital after Shechem before we finally end up with Samaria. But he's in, at that time, a capital city, getting drunk in the home of Arza, the palace administrator. Zimri came in, struck him down, and killed him. That's assassination in the 27th year of Asa. That's our historical marker. Point C. Fulfilled by Elah's death, the prophetic word brought against his father Baasha and his father's lineage. So things are not just looking really, really good. Turn the page. We got more kings. Zimri. Now, what tribe is Zimri? We have no idea. Text never tells us. The date of his reign, 7 days. All right, Zimri, didn't even have time to get the monument up. 7 days. This is the shortest reign of all the northern kings. 7 days. Theological evaluation, bad. How can it be bad in 7 days? Well, how he got to be king is bad enough. He found Elah, the drunk king, and assassinated him. He reigned 7 days. Then Omri was proclaimed the commander of the armies and the new king by Omri's supporters. And when Zimri realized that the army had proclaimed him the king, he knew his end was near. So what did he do? He set his royal palace on fire and died in the flames, probably suicide. So Zimri commits suicide, burns the palace down, because he knows that army is going to come, and they're not going to say, hey, would you just move out and go to another place? They're going to kill him. He knows his life's over, so he just commits suicide. Now, he had a 7-day reign, but notice how the biblical text describes his policies. 1 Kings 16. So he died. Why? Because of the sins he had committed. It's hard to commit much in 7 days, but he did. Doing evil in the eyes of the Lord. And he followed the path or the example. He was cut from the same cloth as Jeroboam, committing the same kind of Jeroboam idolatrous sin. We note the continual downward spiral due to Jeroboam's initial sin is being passed from king to king to king. This is not genetic generational sin, but this is political generational sin. It's just getting worse. All right. Well, now Omri is going to establish a dynasty. And we call it the Omride dynasty. It'll last, I think, about 4 generations. Again, we don't know what tribe he was from. He is a bad king, but politically, he was probably a capable king. Had some military victories. He made some strategic alliances. In fact, have you ever heard of the Moabite stone? In archaeology, they discovered this, what they call the Moabite stone. And in it talks about him making a having a big victory over Moab, the country of Moab. So we know that he was probably a capable leader of sorts, except theologically, he's bad. He's a bad king. Well, let's look at some of his. He came to power at the death of Zimri, placed into power by the military. He opposed the supporters of Tibni because Tibni, with that political insecurity and instability, Tibni thought, hey, I'll jump in front of Omri and I'll be the king. But Tibni lost out. He was killed, and Omri was pronounced king. That civil war between Tibni and Omri lasted about 6 years until Tibni died. But nonetheless, Omri, announced king by his soldiers, took him 6 years, and he is now the king. He moves the capital from Tirzah, after 6 years, to the new capital and the final capital at Samaria. And so from here on, the northern kingdom's capital city is Samaria. Turn the page. He is also evaluated harshly in his 12-year reign. But Omri did evil in the eyes of the Lord and sinned, catch this, more than all before him. That's a distinctive of his reign. He may be capable politically, but he's a work of art spiritually. He followed completely the ways of Jeroboam. Notice how everything always goes back to Jeroboam, because Jeroboam introduced idolatry into the kingdom. And idolatry is very much odious in the eyes of God. You know, we do a lot of things that are sin that God doesn't like, but idolatry is a huge one, particularly for his chosen people. Think of the 10 Commandments, Exodus 20. Have no other gods before me, and you will not make any images or idols, and so forth. God is a jealous God. He does not share his affections with other gods or false gods or would-be gods. And so the theomonarch is not listening to Theo, that is to say Theos, God, is not listening to God, and therefore cannot appropriately rule the nation. And so he followed completely the ways of Jeroboam, committing the same sin, and that aroused the anger of the Lord, the God of Israel, by their worthless idols. Now, we come to G, maybe a very familiar king, and maybe the most notorious bad king, and that's Ahab. Who was Ahab's wife? Jezebel. All right, here we are at Jezebel. Wait till I tell you a little bit about what her name means. But this is the second king of the Omri dynasty. He will have a 22-year reign. At the time he's reigning, Asa is going to be the king in the south. Then he'll also reign with his son Jehoshaphat for a while. They'll co-reign. Ahab is a bad king. Point B, he's considered to be exceptionally bad in the eyes of the Lord. 1 Kings 16:30. Ahab, son of Omri, did more evil in the eyes of the Lord than any of those before him. So it just keeps getting worse. Worse than the one before him. Then the next one is worse than the one before him. So it's just going down. I mean, what an epitaph. Perhaps the reason was his attempt to make Baal worship the official national religion. Remember, he with his crummy wife Jezebel, I started to call her that evil slut, but I'm not. But Ahab, with his evil wife, is trying to kill off the true prophets of God and institute Baal as the official national religion. How do you think that plays with God? How do you think he, from his perspective in heaven, what do you think he thinks about it? Well, Ahab did more evil. He married the daughter of Ethbaal, the king of the Sidonians, named Jezebel. Jezebel's name in Hebrew means, wait for it, dunghill. Do you suppose that was her given name, or was that the name the Israelites gave her? Yeah, that's the Israelites' name for her. Yeah, I doubt if dunghill was, probably given to her by the Israelites. At any rate, Ahab was compliant with her, introducing Baal and Asherah, that's the female goddess, Asherah worship. Have you ever heard of the preacher? He was out of Memphis, R.G. Lee. I think he was at Bellevue Baptist Church in Memphis years and years ago. He was a great preacher, but he was clever in his preaching. R.G. Lee called Ahab the vile human toad who squatted on the throne. I like that. But I like what he also said about Jezebel. The beautiful adder coiled beside the toad. You get a sense that these folks aren't going to win the heart of the folks and all. Look at 1 Kings 16:31. He not only considered it trivial to commit the sins of Jeroboam, but he also married Jezebel, dunghill, and he began to serve Baal and worship him, set up an altar for Baal in the temple of Baal that he built in Samaria. Ahab made an Asherah pole and did more to arouse the anger of the Lord, the God of Israel, than all the kings before him. And he also began to kill off all the prophets of the Lord. That's in 1 Kings 18. Okay, turn the page. Top of the next page. He faced the prophet, circle it, Elijah. And we will study Elijah next time. Elijah and Elisha both. Elijah, who opposed Ahab and Jezebel. He he did some political things. You can read that later in E. He actually went to war, not against Jehoshaphat, but with Jehoshaphat against Aram and so forth. So there were some political things that he's doing that are probably appropriate, but boy, the heart of this king is just way off. So at the bottom of that section, 1 Kings 22, the king died, was brought to Samaria. They buried him there. They washed the chariot at a pool in Samaria where the prostitutes bathed, and the dogs licked up his blood, and the word, as the word of the Lord had declared. Now, he had been injured in battle in his chariot, and he died, and so there had been a prophecy, Elijah's prophecy of Ahab's death, and it was actually filled up dogs licking up his blood and so forth. So all of, what God had promised through the prophet did come about. Well, the third king, after he dies, the third king of the Omride dynasty is Ahaziah. He had a brief reign as well. Again, he's a bad king. He succeeded Ahab for a brief reign. He was injured in a fall, and so Ahaziah sent to call Baal-zebub, the false god of Ekron, rather than consulting the Lord. So it gives you a sense that he's right in line with all these other kings. The Lord, rather, then sent Elijah with a true prophetic message for the king. And you'll notice at the top of the next page, chapter 2, 2 Kings chapter 1, verse 3. But the angel of the Lord said to Elijah the Tishbite, "Go up and meet the messengers of the king of Samaria and ask them, is it because there's no God in Israel that you're off to consult Baal-zebub?" In other words, God intervenes, and instead of them going to a false god on behalf of the king, Elijah shows up and says, "Hey, did we not have any gods that were good enough? Therefore, this is what the Lord says, you'll not leave the bed you're lying on. You're dying." End of sentence, period. He was evaluated harshly. You'll see it in 1 Kings 22 there. He did evil in the eyes of the Lord. Why? He followed the ways of his father and mother. Who was his father and mother? That's Ahab and Jezebel. And Jeroboam, he followed Jeroboam, son of Nebat, who caused Israel to sin. So we're back to that again. Here we are in that same old Jezebel, or not Jezebel, the same old Jeroboam's downward spiral. He served and worshiped Baal. He aroused the anger of the Lord, just as his father had done. Can it get any worse? Well, let's see. The fourth king of the Omride dynasty, and the last, by the way, 4 generations. Bad evaluation of Joram, or sometimes he's called Jehoram, Joram or Jehoram. He came to the kingship at the death of his brother Ahaziah. He's evaluated less harshly than his father Ahab, though he's still considered an evil king. He did evil in the eyes of the Lord, but not as his father and mother had done. I mean, nobody's that bad, but he's still bad. But he's just not that bad. Verse 3, nevertheless, one bad thing, he clung to the sins of Jeroboam. So he's in that same Jeroboam idolatry downward slide. Next page. Talks about a little joint venture with one of the kings of Judah, try to stave off the Moabites. Elisha enters into it. He's going to be also in session 3 next time. And I'll let you read some of that later. Let's jump down to Jehu at the bottom. Jehu. Well, I'll tell you what, let's skip up because we really need to see point E at the top. Joram died at the hands of Jehu, the next king. Jehu also killed Ahaziah, the 6th king of Judah, the southern kingdom. He's killing kings left and right, who was meeting with Jehu to plan their war against the Arameans. The death of, see where it says Jehu? All right, that's errata. That's wrong. It should say Joram, Joram. So where it says death of Jehu, put Joram instead. And I just caught that just a few days ago. So that ended the Omride dynasty. Now, here's this Jehu guy. We'll turn the page on him. Let's go to page 36. Jehu. He was the commander at Ramoth Gilead under Joram, King Joram. He was also anointed as the next king by a prophet that Elisha sent to anoint him. Now, Elisha was supposed to have anointed him because the Lord told him, go and anoint Jehu as the next king. But for whatever reason, Elisha didn't get it done, so he sent a prophet to do it for him. For point C, he was tasked by God through the prophet to destroy the house of Ahab and Jezebel. Now, when it says the house, we're talking about the dynasty. Any living relative. 2 Kings 9:7. You are to destroy the dynasty of Ahab, your master, and I will avenge the blood of my servants, the prophets, and the blood of all the Lord's servants shed by Jezebel, Dunghill. And she was a bloody Jezebel. The whole house of Ahab will perish. I'll cut off every last male, and so forth. Verse 10, as for Jezebel, dogs will devour her on the plot of ground at Jezreel, and no one will bury her. And that, in fact, came about, as the prophet suggested. Also, Jehu killed Joram, son of Ahab. Again, Ahab was the 9th king. And Ahaziah, the 6th king of Judah, who were together in battle. He, verse point E at the very, very bottom, he exterminated the descendants. And why did they do that in ancient times? All ancient kings did that, not just these biblical kings. Why did they do that? Well, you're eliminating claimants to the throne. That if you were of royal blood, you might later raise up supporters and then say, I am of royal blood, I claim what is rightfully mine, I claim the kingship. So in order to take care of that, you just kill all of the claimants, all of the members of that dynasty, the house or the dynasty. So, which is what he did. If you'll turn to page 37, in the middle of the page, point F, he also killed Jezebel, the wife of Ahab, in fulfillment of prophecy. Point G, he destroyed the prophets of Baal by deception. H, he failed to complete the task of ridding Israel of false worship, and by not destroying the calf idols at Dan and Bethel. This was a grievous sin on his behalf. Jehu had a chance of being a good king, but he failed. And by not destroying those calf idols, and by not destroying, therefore, idolatrous worship, he failed grievously. So we evaluate him with some positive and some negative. 2 Kings 10:30, the Lord said to Jehu, because you have done well, but look at verse 31. What's the first word? Yet. So you did well in part, but you blew it. You did well in accomplishing what's right in my eyes, and you did to Ahab and his dynasty what I told you to do. Verse 31, yet Jehu was not careful to keep the law. He was disobedient to the law, Mosaic law, the God of Israel with all of his heart, and he did not turn away from the sins of who? There we go again. The sins of Jeroboam. We're back to this Jeroboam thing, who set the pattern of idolatrous worship, and it has followed all of these kings. We're down to the 11th king, and we're still talking about Jeroboam. Okay?
None of them did.
Did what?
None of them, I mean, all of them followed.
Yeah. It's a downward, continuous spiral. Jehoahaz. He's another bad one. Let's top of the next page. Page 38, events in his life. He succeeded his father, Jehu. He reigned 17 years. And, point B, he did evil in the eyes of the Lord. Biblical text. He did evil in the eyes of the Lord by following the sins of Jeroboam. Here's that old familiar refrain. Verse 3. So as a result, the Lord's anger burned against Israel. And for a long time, he kept them under the power of Hazael, king of Aram, and Ben-Hadad, his son. Now, he did call upon the Lord during a time of national political crisis. During the stressful attacks of Hazael, the Lord answered his prayer and delivered his people. Now catch this. These are bad kings. They are idolatrous kings. They are disobedient to Mosaic law kings. And yet when these kings, on behalf of the people, as theomonarchs, when they cry out to the Lord, God hears them because they're his people. They are his children. And what we hope is when they cry out to the Lord and the Lord works on their behalf, that they would then institute a national revival. But that never happens because the idolatry is so entrenched. The sin is so entrenched. Point D, the effect spiritually of the deliverance that God gave them was not impactful on the people of Israel. They remained in idolatry. Verse 6 there says, they did not turn away from the sins of the house of Jeroboam. Once again, house of Jeroboam. Also, the Asherah pole remained standing in Samaria, a female goddess. Right there, people still practicing idolatry. All right, number 12, Jehoash. He's bad. Let's turn the page. See what key events in Jehoash. Top of page 39, evaluated theologically with all the other kings of the north. Did evil in the eyes of the Lord. Didn't turn away from the sins of Jeroboam. You've always got a sense that we're doing a cut and paste on all of these kings. But that tells you the accurate condition of their hearts. He was evaluated historically by Josephus. Now remember, Josephus was a first century Jewish historian. So we know a lot about the times of Jesus, and he wrote an entire history for his Roman benefactor, one of the Roman generals. I can't remember which one it was. But he nonetheless wrote this history. And this is what he said about Jehoash. He was a good man, and in disposition was not at all like his father. Well, that may be your opinion, Josephus, but theologically, he still falls within line with all the other evil kings.
I have a question.
Yes, ma'am.
So in 13:13, it says that Jehoash rested.
Said Jehoash did what?
Rested. And then but then he's still in the story. And then it says in 14:16,
I mean,
that he rested and
let me
was
get,
buried.
let me go to my big Bible. And,
Okay. I just wondered, that seems to contradict, so I wondered if the first resting just meant, I didn't know what it meant.
You're right. I mean, he rested with his fathers means he died. But understand that then we do a backtrack. We
Right.
pick up a prophet and how he interacted
And then
within
it goes
this.
back
And then
says
later,
arrested
yeah,
again. Okay.
later, telling the prophet's story, we tell his death again. Yeah, that's what's happening.
Okay.
Yeah, good insight. Well, let's skip that. Well, one thing that I thought was interesting was point E. He did have a certain fondness for Elisha, that's kind of a. We may see more of that next week when we do Elijah and Elisha. But I always thought that was kind of interesting for an evil king or a bad king to have a fondness for a prophet like Elisha. All right, Jeroboam, number 2, a namesake, and he's a bad king. He's evaluated in light of perpetuating false worship. So here we go again. 2 Kings 14:24, did evil in the eyes of the Lord, did not return away from the sins of his namesake, the original Jeroboam 1. He did, top of the next page, regain some territory, so politically he did a few things. But notice C, because that's important. He reigned during the ministry of Amos. Circle Amos. And we'll look at a chart on Amos, the book of Amos. We won't have time to get into it. Zechariah, not the prophet, the king. Zechariah, his father was Jeroboam II, had a brief reign, very brief reign. He's evaluated the same as all the other kings. 2 Kings 15:9, did evil in the eyes of the Lord, just like Jeroboam. Notice point B, he reigned 6 months. Okay? Now, notice we're at king number 14 of 19. Now watch what's going to happen in these kings that are coming up. He reigned 6 months and was assassinated publicly by Shallum, who claimed to be king. That ended the dynasty of Jehu, as was prophesied. And you can read the prophecy later. Let's turn the page and pick up Shallum's big reign. Shallum, the assassinator, theological evaluation, not specifically given. However, due to the manner of his succession in light of previous kings, we presume he was a bad king. Good kings don't go around assassinating other kings. Key events, he assassinated Zechariah. He reigned 1 month. And he was assassinated by Menachem, son of Gadi, so forth. So we now skip to King 16. Menachem, who was a bad king, he's evaluated negatively. Same kind of evaluation. Menachem did evil in the eyes of the Lord. And during his entire reign, he did not turn away from the sins of Jeroboam. So he does not turn from idolatry or false worship. He was likely one of Zechariah's generals who was dismayed by the assassination of his king by the usurper assassin Shallum. And so he attacked Shallum and he became king. So he didn't like that, so he decided he'd kill the one who killed the king. He exercised harsh cruelty against a city by the name of Tifsa. And why did he do that? Well, they refused to acknowledge his kingship, but probably more than that, they were potential, they could cause trouble. Their rebellion could foment there. At that time, this is top of page 42. At that time, Menachem, starting out from Tirzah, attacked Tifsa and everyone in the city and its vicinity because they refused to open their gates. They're refusing to acknowledge Menachem's kingship and bow the knee to him, probably. And so he sacked Tifsa, and notice this, and rip opened all the pregnant women. That's pretty brutal. Now, here's the thing. That is practiced brutality for effect. He didn't do that just because he liked to rip open pregnant women. This is being done for effect. As others heard of his extreme, harsh brutality, then they might be less inclined to assassinate him or to oppose him. This is more reflective of Canaanite practice than God's people, of course. But that shows you how far we've deteriorated. But also, He is a cruel king who is reigning with a reign of terror, with his harsh brutality. Now, he enacted a treaty with Tiglath-Pileser, sometimes called Pul, or there's another name for him, I forget what it is. But at any rate, he paid tribute to the king of Assyria. He paid tribute to him just to keep his borders safe. He has a fragile kingdom. He's buying he's paying off protection money, you know. Now we're at Pekahiah, the 17th king. He is evaluated under the events as he did evil in the eyes of the Lord, didn't turn away from the sins of Jeroboam. Same thing we've seen. Now, Pekahiah was assassinated by one of his chief officers, Pekah, and he reigned only 2 years. Well, what about Pekah? We have to turn the page on Pekah. Page 43. Pekah is just like all the other kings, did evil in the eyes of the Lord, followed Jeroboam. Point B, he was strongly Assyrian. Now, you'll remember the previous king was creating a treaty and paying tribute as a vassal state, paying tribute to Assyria just to keep the peace so that Assyria wouldn't invade. Well, this king, Pekah, he is strongly anti-Assyrian. He broke the treaty enacted by Menachem, and which caused Assyria to retaliate. So the text tells us, 2 Kings 15:29, in the time of Pekah, king of Israel, Tiglath-Pileser, king of Assyria, came and took Ijon, Abel-Beth-Maachah, and so forth, and deported the people to Assyria. Remember we said some people were deported to Assyria, others were brought in and they intermarried, became later the Samaritans. All right, that's all happening. What happened to Pekah? Point C, he's assassinated. Do you get a sense that things are out of control politically?
I mean, who would want to be king?
Yeah, you really got to want power a lot. So he's assassinated by Hoshea. And Hoshea is the 19th and final king. He's evaluated somewhat differently. He did evil in the eyes of the Lord, but not like the kings of Israel who preceded him. He was bad, but not nearly as bad. We don't have any mention of Jeroboam. Previously, he was a puppet king of the Assyrian king, but he began to secretly try to forge alliances with Egypt in order to together oppose Assyria. That's not going to go anywhere. He was attacked by Shalmaneser, the king of Assyria, defeated, and that ended the reign of the northern kingdom. And that ends the reigns of the 19 kings. Okay? We're done with kings. Turn the page. There were 2 writing prophets to the northern kingdom, Amos and Hosea. And so all I'm doing here is just giving you, we're not studying Amos. We just don't have time to pick it up. But I at least have given you the structure of the book of Amos. You'll notice it's 83:53. There are 8 judgments, 3 sermons, 5 visions, and 3 promises. Those promises are eschatological promises. Just talking about the day of the Lord that is far future. In fact, it's future for us. It's that eschatological day when Christ will return and reign over the Messiah King will reign. Now, those 8 judgments, they all have the same kind of, they all have the same kind of structure. For the 3 sins of Damascus, and for 4, you add 3 and 4, you get the number 7, the number of completeness or fullness. And so the fullness of their sin brings judgment by God. And we start with Damascus. And if I were an Israelite in the northern kingdom and a prophet comes and he says, "Woe to Damascus, they're getting what they deserve," I would have given a polite Goth applause. You bet. Gaza, oh yeah, Gaza, that's the Philistines. They deserve it. Tyre, up there in Phoenicia. Edom, we've had trouble with Edom and Ammon and Moab forever. Judah, well, we don't like the southern kingdom. They need to be judged. But then finally, number 8, even Israel is going to be judged. So Amos does a thing where he starts from the outside, works right down to the very people for whom the prophecy is intended. There are 3 sermons. We won't go through that. 5 visions, and then the promises. Notice the key verse at the bottom of the chart. But let justice roll on like a river, righteousness like a never-ending stream. Remember how we started today? Righteousness exalts a nation. Turn the page. One last page, and we're done. Hosea. You're probably familiar with Hosea. There are 2 movements in the book. The first 3 chapters is a life situation. Hosea relationship with his unfaithful wife Gomer. So you have Hosea and Gomer, and a marriage and a remarriage, and we see the prophet's love for his wife, even though she was unfaithful, and he would take her back. But that sets the stage for the real message, and that's chapter 4 to 14, and that is that God says, Israel, you're my wife. And you have been unfaithful, but I'm willing to take you back. And that is, at the very end of it, the restoration. The key verse, a spirit of prostitution is in their heart, Israel. They do not acknowledge the Lord. In other words, spirit of prostitution means they, Israel, chase after false lovers, false gods, or as the King James says, I noted earlier, they go whoring after false gods. And now you get a sense of the repugnance of idolatry from the heart of God. Doesn't look good, folks, in the divided monarchy. If you would, note next time we will be doing Elijah and Elisha. They are the non-writing prophets to Israel. So we're going to see their stories, and it's pretty dramatic, some of it, pretty miraculous. And with that, folks, I can't believe it, but we got through.
I have a question.
Yes, ma'am.
So Jehu, it says that his father was Jehoshaphat. Which that kind of threw me because Jehoshaphat, are there 2 Jehoshaphat's? Because Jehoshaphat, there is a Jehoshaphat that was
Yeah, I
the king
remember.
over Judah.
Let me look, because I think I made a note on that. What page is that on?
Page 35.
Huh?
Page 35 at the bottom.
Okay.
It just confused me because I thought, oh, okay, well, hold on, was his dad one of the kings of Judah? But that must be 2 different ones, I was asking.
Well, what I'd have to do is go back and son of Nimshi. Let me look it up. Let me see if there are 2 Jehoshaphat's.
You stopped at chomp.
Yeah, not hard to
I just
do.
got very confused. So that's why I was like, hold on, I'm trying to keep the kings of each one, and each kingdom separate, you know?
Yeah, another thing you can do is just go to the biblical text, because I did isolated verses, and sometimes it'll clear it up, but I'll do the same. I'll work on that too.
So were all the kings Jews?
Yes, yes. The problem we discover is that all of the kings of the Southern Empire are the lineage of David, which would be the tribe of Judah, and that is the ruling tribe, according to Genesis 49, in Jacob's binding prophetic blessing upon all of the sons. And Judah's was, the scepter will not depart from you until he to whom it belongs comes, which ultimately is Christ, Messiah King. All of the northern kings, none of the northern kings are Davidic. So they're all illegitimate. But God still loves them, and it made a prophecy through Ahijah that to Jeroboam the first is that I will give you a kingship and all of that, and I'll establish you if you'll follow me. But he did not.
So like some of the kingships, like, I don't know, I may have the wrong maps, but like I was looking at some of the kings where they were reigning, that you can't really find them on a new map today. where the names have changed.
Yeah, yeah.
Is that, I mean,
Oh, yeah. That's,
it's a whole other.
oh, it's terrible. When you study, when I was in Israel, studying biblical geography, I had about a month taking a class there. And the problem, you learn to map Israel. But the problem is, in the Old Testament, its name was this. Later, it got changed to something else. Then it got changed to something else. And you're trying to, you got to know what name to what era of history.
I couldn't, I mean,
Yeah.
I was like, I had two different Bibles coming out, two different maps, and I was
Yeah.
like, where'd they go?
Sometimes, when I'm studying, I try to find a scholarly map for the era, for the time that it's, and it'll give me the location.
'Cause I was trying to pinpoint where all these people were at.
Yeah, yeah.
While all this bad was going on.
Yeah, yeah.
And then I was just like, I
Yeah,
gotta find it.
that's the very thing we had to do. We had a manual where we had to draw out all of these battles and where they were coming from and all of this stuff. So that was a hard class. Yeah, Randy?
I'm interested you pointed out that Jehoash defeated Amaziah, so not only were they at war with each other, but actually got into Jerusalem,
Yeah, yeah,
broke
yeah,
into Jerusalem.
yeah, they did. Yeah, didn't hold it, but yeah. All righty, folks. Next time, we'll do a couple of prophets. And let me just warn you, I got carried away. It's a long one. So try to, if you can, try to read. Yeah. It's 30 pages or so.
How long is this?
20 something, 27. But
Hey, Robert, when you were talking about with that opening the bell is pregnant, I just instantly got a flash of like Charles Manson and, just creepy things that happen in our culture today
Yeah.
but they're almost always, not always, but it seems like somehow they're related to meth and crack and heroin and all this stuff. Like, were these people, they had alcohol, but were their minds that twisted just from
just
cultural-
brutal. It was just, I mean, they were brutal, unfeeling, unsympathetic. It was done for political reasons. Think in terms of the babies of Bethlehem, when King Herod had all of the 2 years and under, and you're a soldier, and that's your job is to kill a baby. You become, they would become hardened
Yeah.
to warfare, to death, to blood.
Which still is going on, but it just seems more,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. That's part of the problem in our sensitivities
Yeah.
to brutality. We read back to a time when it was not a good practice. I'm not defending it,
Right,
but it was a common practice.
correct, yeah.
Now,
We're just soft,
this may have been a little extreme,
yeah.
granted.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. Oh, let's go back to Ecclesiastes, there's nothing new on this side, it's just been going on forever.
Yeah.
It's just
Yeah.
I got a
nauseating.
question.
Yes, sir.
Baptism. You got me thinking, man, Thursday morning,
Yeah.
I was born in a Baptist church.
Yeah.
Baptized, sprinkled,
Sprinkle. Yeah, back on.
when I was about 11, 12 years old. And I never had been what you would say,
Yeah.
but years ago, when we started coming here, we went to a Free Will Baptist church, which I'm against.
Yeah.
But it was 3 miles from the house. But to join the church, they wanted me to be baptized, which I baptized, got baptized.
Yeah.
But for all these years, it's bothered me that that was something that was, I felt like pushed on me. But I have never been baptized in the way that I want to be baptized. Now, with that being said, a buddy of mine that went to Dallas Theological Seminary that was baptized younger in life, he didn't feel like that was what he felt like it was more like he needed to get baptized. So he got baptized recently. And I really got thinking about
Mhm.
my baptism. I know baptism because it's but there's still something inside that's non being committed in a way of saying, I'm being baptized.
Yeah.
Is that